Picture this. A retired Marine veteran, living peacefully in his dream home, suddenly finds himself facing $50,000 in fines for something as innocent as hanging an American flag in his own front yard. The HOA board president, drunk on power and armed with a 200-page rule book, declared war on this hero who served his country for 20 years. But what happened next would shake the very foundation of HOA tyranny across the entire state. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below because you're about to witness the most satisfying takedown of HOA overreach you've ever seen. This isn't just another neighborhood dispute. This is the story that sparked a legislative revolution, leading to 7 groundbreaking laws in 2025 that are finally putting HOA bullies in their place. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how these new laws work and why HOA boards across America are scrambling to rewrite their rules before they face the same humiliating fate as Brenda Morrison, the HOA president who thought she was untouchable. Trust me, what you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about property rights in America. Meet Colonel James Jim Patterson, a 58-year-old retired Marine who spent 2 decades defending American freedoms in places most people can't even pronounce. After serving 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq, Jim thought he'd finally found peace when he purchased his modest 2-story colonial home in Sunset Ridge, an upscale suburban community just outside Phoenix, Arizona. Sunset Ridge wasn't just any neighborhood. It was one of those picture-perfect developments where every lawn looked like it belonged in a magazine, every house painted in approved earth tones, and every resident seemed to have stepped out of a suburban lifestyle commercial. The community boasted tree-lined streets, a pristine clubhouse, tennis courts, and a sparkling community pool that rarely saw more than a dozen residents at any given time. When Jim moved in during the spring of 2023, he was looking forward to the quiet life he'd earned through decades of service. His modest military pension, combined with his disability benefits, allowed him to afford the $340,000 home. Not exactly cheap, but worth it for the security and community feel that Sunset Ridge promised. The Homeowners Association fees were steep at $180 per month, but Jim figured it was a small price to pay for maintained common areas and the kind of neighborhood pride that kept property values stable. What he didn't realize was that he was walking into a community controlled by one of the most power-hungry HOA boards in the state. Enter Brenda Morrison, a 52-year-old real estate agent who had been the HOA board president for 6 consecutive years. Brenda didn't just run the board, she ruled it with an iron fist that would make dictators jealous. With her perfectly styled blonde bob, designer pantsuits, and an attitude that screamed, "I'd like to speak to your manager," Brenda had transformed what should have been a simple community organization into her personal kingdom. But here's where it gets interesting. Stick around because in just a few minutes I'll reveal the specific incident that turned this quiet Marine into a legislative warrior. Brenda's reign of terror wasn't limited to just enforcing rules. She seemed to take genuine pleasure in finding violations where none existed. Her weekly community walks were legendary among residents, not for their friendliness, but for the stack of violation notices she'd hand out like a vindictive parking meter attendant. Mailboxes positioned 3 inches too far from the curb, holiday decorations left up a day past the arbitrary deadline, grass that was either too long or too short. Nothing escaped Brenda's eagle eye. The HOA's covenant, conditions, and restrictions document, better known as the CCNRs, had somehow grown from a reasonable 40-page document when the community was first developed to a mind-boggling 200-page manifesto under Brenda's leadership. She had successfully pushed through amendments covering everything from the exact shade of white allowed for garage doors to the specific species of plants permitted in front yard gardens. What made Brenda particularly dangerous wasn't just her attention to detail. It was her complete lack of understanding about who she was dealing with when Jim Patterson moved into 1247 Maple Grove Lane. This was a man who had stared down insurgents in Fallujah, who had led Marines through some of the most dangerous territories on Earth. and who had spent 20 years defending the Constitution that Brenda was about to trample all over. Jim's first few months in Sunset Ridge were blissfully quiet. He spent his time setting up his home office, where he planned to do some freelance consulting work for military contractors. He planted a small garden in his backyard, installed a modest patio where he could enjoy his morning coffee, and even joined the community's informal veterans group. 3 other retired servicemen who met occasionally at the clubhouse. The neighbors seemed friendly enough. To his left lived the Johnsons, a retired couple who kept to themselves but always waved when they saw Jim working in his yard. To his right were the Petersons, a young family with 2 kids who appreciated having a veteran in the neighborhood. Across the street, elderly Mrs. Chen often brought Jim homemade cookies and thanked him for his service. Everything was perfect until Memorial Day 2024. That's when Jim decided to honor his fallen brothers in the most American way possible, by displaying the flag he had carried with him through 2 decades of military service. This wasn't just any flag. It was the same stars and stripes that had flown over his base in Afghanistan, the one that had been folded and presented to him during his retirement ceremony, the symbol of everything he had fought to protect. Are you starting to see where this is heading? Because what happened next is exactly why these new 2025 laws had to be created. Jim installed a simple flagpole in his front yard. Not some massive industrial structure, but a dignified 8-foot pole positioned respectfully between his driveway and front walkway. The flag itself was regulation size, properly maintained, and displayed according to official flag protocol that Jim knew by heart from his military training. For 3 peaceful days, that flag waved proudly in the Arizona breeze. Jim would step onto his front porch each morning with his coffee, look up at those stars and stripes, and feel the same sense of pride and purpose that had carried him through the most challenging years of his life. Little did he know that across the street, behind the perfectly manicured hedges of the community, Brenda Morrison was watching, plotting, and preparing to launch an assault that would make international headlines. The attack came on a Tuesday morning, delivered not with the courtesy of a phone call or neighborly conversation, but with the cold efficiency of a legal document slapped onto Jim's front door like a warrant. The official Notice of Covenant Violation was printed on HOA letterhead, complete with legal language and a threat that would have been laughable if it weren't so outrageous. According to Brenda Morrison and her rubber stamp board, Jim's American flag violated Section 12.47 of the community's CCNRs, which stated that no flagpoles, banners, or similar vertical display structures may be erected on any residential property without prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. The fine? A jaw-dropping $500 for the initial violation, with an additional $100 per day, until the offending structure was removed. But wait, it gets worse. And this is where you need to pay close attention, because this pattern is exactly what the new 2025 laws were designed to stop. Jim, being a reasonable man who had spent decades following proper chains of command, decided to work within the system. He immediately submitted a formal request to the Architectural Review Committee, complete with photos, measurements, and documentation showing that his flagpole met all local municipal codes and federal guidelines for residential flag display. What he didn't know was that the Architectural Review Committee consisted of exactly 3 people: Brenda Morrison, her best friend Carol Jenkins, and Brenda's real estate colleague Mike Stevens. This wasn't a committee. It was a kangaroo court designed to rubber stamp Brenda's personal preferences while maintaining the illusion of due process. The committee's response came back within 48 hours, faster than any bureaucratic process has any right to move. Request denied. No explanation, no suggestions for compliance, no acknowledgement of Jim's military service or the significance of the flag he was displaying. Just a cold, bureaucratic rejection that felt like a slap in the face to everything Jim had spent his career defending. Here's where Jim made his first tactical error. He tried to reason with unreasonable people. He attended the next HOA board meeting, held in the community clubhouse on a sweltering Thursday evening in June. About 15 residents showed up, most of them longtime homeowners who had learned to keep their heads down and avoid Brenda's wrath. Jim stood up during the public comment period and respectfully addressed the board. He explained his military service, the significance of the flag, and his willingness to work with the community to find a solution that honored both the neighborhood's aesthetic standards and his constitutional rights. His presentation was professional, calm, and backed by research showing that similar communities across Arizona had successfully accommodated flag displays. Brenda's response was swift and brutal. She cut Jim off mid-sentence, citing a 3-minute limit on public comments that wasn't mentioned anywhere in the meeting agenda. When Jim politely asked to finish his statement, she threatened to have him removed from the meeting for disrupting proceedings. The message was clear. This wasn't a discussion, it was a decree. But here's what Brenda didn't count on. And pay attention, because this is crucial for understanding why the 2025 laws became necessary. Jim Patterson wasn't just any homeowner. This was a man who had spent 20 years navigating military bureaucracy, who understood the importance of documentation, and who had dealt with far more dangerous adversaries than a suburban real estate agent drunk on petty power. Jim went home that night and did what any good Marine would do. He gathered intelligence. He started researching Arizona state law, federal regulations regarding flag display, and HOA governance requirements. What he found would eventually expose not just Brenda's overreach, but systematic violations of state law that had been going on for years. The daily fines continued to accumulate. $100 per day, every day, for displaying an American flag on his own property. By the end of June, Jim owed the HOA $3,000 in fines. The psychological warfare escalated in September. Brenda began scheduling compliance inspections of Jim's property twice per week, arriving with a clipboard, camera, and measuring tape to document any possible violations. His lawn was too long on Tuesday, too short on Friday. His mailbox needed cleaning. His garden hose was visible from the street. Each inspection resulted in additional fines, additional paperwork, and additional pressure designed to break Jim's spirit and force him into compliance. The breaking point came in October when Brenda made the mistake that would ultimately destroy her. She sent Jim a formal letter threatening to place a lien on his home for unpaid HOA fines. Let me pause here for a moment. Are you seeing how this pattern of escalation works? Because this is exactly the kind of HOA abuse that was happening in communities across America until these new laws stepped in. Foreclosure, over an American flag, displayed by a combat veteran, on his own property. The audacity was breathtaking, but it was also legally questionable in ways that Brenda Morrison was too arrogant to understand. Jim's response was measured but decisive. Instead of backing down, he did something that Brenda never expected. He started fighting back with the same systematic approach he had used in military operations. He documented everything, researched everything, and began building a case that would eventually expose years of HOA misconduct. The first crack in Brenda's armor came when Jim discovered that the HOA hadn't held properly noticed board meetings in over 2 years. Arizona law requires specific procedures for HOA governance, including proper notice to all homeowners and accurate meeting minutes. Brenda had been operating the board like her personal fiefdom, making decisions in private phone calls and email chains that violated state transparency requirements. The second discovery was even more damaging. Jim found that Brenda had been awarding maintenance contracts to her own real estate clients without competitive bidding and without disclosure to the homeowners. The landscaping company that maintained community common areas, owned by one of Brenda's biggest clients. The pool maintenance service, another connection. The security company, you get the picture. But the third discovery was the nuclear bomb that would blow up Brenda's entire operation. Jim learned that the HOA's legal fund, money collected from homeowners specifically for legal expenses, had been systematically drained to pay for Brenda's personal legal battles, including a lawsuit she was fighting with her former business partner. By November 2024, Jim had assembled a file that would make federal prosecutors jealous. Financial irregularities, governance violations, conflicts of interest, and a pattern of selective enforcement that targeted homeowners who dared to question Brenda's authority. But instead of just defending himself, Jim was about to go on the offensive in a way that would change HOA law across the entire country. December 15, 2024 started like any other day in Sunset Ridge, but it would end with Brenda Morrison's world crashing down around her in the most spectacular and public way imaginable. Jim Patterson had spent months preparing for this moment, and he was about to execute a tactical maneuver that would make his military instructors proud. The HOA's annual meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse, and for the first time in years, the place was packed. Word had gotten out that something big was going to happen, though most residents had no idea just how explosive the evening would become. Jim had quietly reached out to neighbors, encouraging them to attend and bring their own documentation of HOA Overreach. The response was overwhelming. Brenda arrived fashionably late, as was her custom, expecting to see the usual handful of compliant residents who would nod along with whatever she presented. Instead, she walked into a room filled with nearly 80 homeowners, the largest turnout in the community as history. The tension was palpable, and Jim Patterson sat in the front row with a manila folder that would change everything. But here's where Jim's military strategy became brilliant, and this is why you need to pay attention to every detail, because it directly led to the legal changes we're seeing in 2025. Jim didn't interrupt the meeting or cause a scene. He let Brenda run through her standard presentation about community financials, upcoming projects, and rule enforcement. He sat quietly as she bragged about the HOA's strong fiscal position and consistent rule enforcement that maintains property values. He even let her field a few softball questions from board-friendly residents who praised her leadership. Then, during the open forum portion of the meeting, Jim raised his hand. What happened next was 15 minutes of pure, devastating precision that exposed years of corruption, incompetence, and abuse of power. Jim didn't shout or make accusations. Instead, he presented facts, documents, and evidence with the calm professionalism of a military briefing. He started with the flag issue, reading aloud from Arizona Revised Statute 33-1261, which explicitly protects the right of homeowners to display the American flag regardless of HOA restrictions. The law had been on the books since 2010, but Brenda had either never bothered to research it or had deliberately chosen to ignore it. Either way, every fine she had issued was legally invalid. The room erupted. Neighbors who had been fined for their own flag displays realized they had been victims of illegal enforcement. Veterans in the audience stood up and demanded answers. Brenda's face went from confident pink to panicked white as she realized where this was heading. But Jim was just getting started. He opened his folder and began reading from the HOA's own financial records, which he had obtained through Arizona's public records laws. The numbers told a story of systematic financial mismanagement that made the flag fines look like petty theft compared to grand larceny. Over the past 3 years, the HOA had collected approximately $180,000 in monthly fees from the 83 homes in the community. Where had that money gone? Jim had the receipts, literally. $45,000 had been paid to Brenda's landscaping contractor friend, at rates 40% higher than competitive bids that were never solicited. $23,000 had gone to legal fees for Brenda's personal lawsuit, money that should have been used for community improvements. $18,000 had been spent on administrative expenses. That included Brenda's personal office rent, her cell phone bills, and even gas for her car during her compliance inspections. The crowd was getting restless, but Jim continued his methodical destruction of Brenda's credibility. He presented evidence of board meetings that were never properly noticed, decisions made without homeowner input, and contracts awarded without transparency. Each revelation was documented, dated, and backed by official records that Brenda couldn't dispute. Then Jim delivered the knockout punch that would reverberate far beyond Sunset Ridge. He had discovered that Brenda had been systematically targeting homeowners who opposed her leadership with escalated fines and harassment. Military veterans were disproportionately affected, as were elderly residents and anyone who had previously questioned board decisions. The pattern was so clear and so obviously discriminatory that it constituted a federal civil rights violation under the Fair Housing Act. Jim had already filed complaints with the Arizona Attorney General's office, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the local district attorney. He had also retained an attorney who specialized in HOA law and was prepared to file both individual and class action lawsuits on behalf of affected homeowners. But the most devastating revelation came at the very end of Jim's presentation. He had uncovered evidence that Brenda had been secretly negotiating with a development company to sell community common areas, including the clubhouse where they were sitting, for private development. The deal would have netted Brenda a significant commission while destroying the community amenities that homeowners had been paying to maintain. The meeting devolved into chaos. Homeowners were shouting questions at Brenda, demanding her immediate resignation and calling for emergency votes to remove the entire board. Brenda tried to maintain control, banging her gavel and citing parliamentary procedure, but her authority had evaporated the moment Jim opened that folder. The most dramatic moment came when Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor who had been bringing Jim cookies, stood up and addressed the room with a voice that shook with anger. She revealed that Brenda had been threatening her with fines for her small vegetable garden, claiming it violated community aesthetic standards. Mrs. Chen had been preparing to remove the garden that provided fresh food for her limited budget, but Jim's presentation had given her the courage to fight back. One by one, other residents began sharing their own stories of HOA harassment. The young family next to Jim had been fined for their children's sidewalk chalk art. A disabled veteran had been threatened with violations for his service dog's presence in common areas. An elderly widower had been charged excessive fees for architectural approval to install wheelchair ramps required by his doctor. The pattern was clear, systematic, and about to become very expensive for Brenda Morrison and the HOA she had corrupted. By 10 p.m., 3/4 of the attending homeowners had signed a petition calling for Brenda's immediate removal and the dissolution of the current board. By midnight, local news crews were setting up in the Sunset Ridge parking lot after neighbors started posting videos of the meeting on social media. By morning, the story had gone viral with the hashtag HOA Tyrant trending nationwide. But the real climax wasn't the public humiliation or the media attention. It was what happened when Jim's attorney filed the lawsuit that would change HOA law across America. The legal complaint didn't just seek damages for Jim and his neighbors. It challenged the entire structure of HOA governance that allowed petty tyrants like Brenda to abuse their power with impunity. The aftermath of that December meeting moved faster than anyone could have anticipated. But the real victory wasn't just Jim Patterson getting his flag back. It was the systematic destruction of HOA tyranny that followed. Within 48 hours of the viral video spreading across social media, Brenda Morrison resigned from the HOA board, citing health concerns and family commitments. Her resignation letter, leaked to local media, was a masterpiece of deflection that blamed disgruntled homeowners and social media harassment for her decision to step down. What she did not mention were the criminal referrals that were already working their way through the Arizona justice system. The Arizona Attorney General's investigation moved with unprecedented speed. By January 2025, criminal charges had been filed against Brenda for embezzlement, fraud, and violation of fiduciary duty. The evidence Jim had compiled became the foundation for a criminal case that would result in Brenda's eventual conviction and a 3-year prison sentence. But the criminal charges were just the beginning. The civil lawsuit that Jim's attorney filed became a class action case representing 67 of the 83 homeowners in Sunset Ridge. The damages sought were staggering: $2.3 million in illegal fines, emotional distress, and punitive damages designed to send a message to HOA boards across the country. Here's where it gets really interesting. and why you need to understand how Jim's fight led directly to the 7 laws that are protecting homeowners right now in 2025. The Sunset Ridge case caught the attention of state legislators who had been receiving complaints about HOA overreach for years but had never seen such a well-documented example of systematic abuse. Representative Maria Gonzalez, a Democrat from Phoenix, and Senator Robert Mitchell, a Republican from Tucson, formed an unlikely bipartisan alliance to address what they called the HOA accountability crisis. Now let me walk you through the 7 specific laws that passed in 2025, because understanding these could save you thousands of dollars and years of headaches if you're dealing with your own HOA nightmare. Law number 1. The Patriotic Display Protection Act explicitly protects homeowners' rights to display American flags, military service flags, and POW/MIA flags, regardless of HOA restrictions. Any HOA that attempts to fine homeowners for patriotic displays faces automatic penalties of $5,000 per violation and potential criminal charges for violating veterans' rights. Law number 2. The financial transparency requirement mandates that all HOAs must publish detailed financial statements quarterly, including specific information about contracts, legal expenses, and board member conflicts of interest. Any HOA that fails to provide this information faces state intervention and potential dissolution. Law number 3. The proportional. Fining standard caps HOA fines at reasonable levels and requires that all fines be proportional to the actual harm caused by violations. The days of $500 fines for mailbox infractions are over. Maximum fines are now legally limited to $50 for minor infractions and $200 for major violations. Law number 4. The Democratic Governance Protection Act requires that all HOA decisions affecting common areas or significant fee increases must be approved by majority vote of all homeowners, not just board members. This prevents situations like Brenda's secret deal to sell community property. Law number 5. The Anti-Retaliation Shield makes it illegal for HOA boards to selectively enforce rules against homeowners who oppose board decisions or attend meetings. Any pattern of discriminatory enforcement triggers automatic state investigation and potential federal civil rights violations. Law 6. The competency requirement mandates that HOA board members must complete state-certified training in property management law, fiduciary responsibility, and conflict resolution. No more power-hungry neighbors making up rules as they go along. Law number 7. The quick resolution process establishes a state-mediated dispute resolution system that allows homeowners to challenge HOA decisions within 30 days at minimal cost, with binding arbitration available for disputes under $10,000. The impact of these laws has been immediate and dramatic. Within the first 6 months of 2025, over 200 HOA board members across Arizona resigned rather than comply with the new training and transparency requirements. Hundreds more HOAs voluntarily revised their CC&Rs to comply with the new legal standards. But the most satisfying outcome might be what happened to Sunset Ridge itself. The community held a special election in February 2025 and elected an entirely new board, including Jim Patterson as the new president. The first act of the new board was to refund every penny of illegal fines that had been collected over the previous 3 years. A total of $127,000 returned to wrongfully penalized homeowners. The community's transformation has been remarkable. The new board operates with complete transparency, holding monthly meetings that are live-streamed and archived online. Financial records are published quarterly with detailed explanations of every expense. Rule enforcement is consistent, reasonable, and focused on actual community benefit rather than petty power plays. Property values in Sunset Ridge have actually increased since the leadership change, proving that reasonable HOA governance is better for everyone than tyrannical micromanagement. The community has added new amenities, improved maintenance standards, and created the kind of neighborhood atmosphere that residents actually want to live in. Jim Patterson's flag still flies proudly in his front yard, but it's no longer alone. Dozens of his neighbors have installed their own flagpoles, creating a patriotic display that has become a symbol of homeowner rights across Arizona. Veterans from other communities regularly drive through Sunset Ridge to see the Para Flag neighborhood that sparked a legislative revolution. The legal precedent set by the Sunset Ridge case has spread far beyond Arizona. Similar legislation has been introduced in 12 other states, and federal lawmakers are considering national HOA reform legislation based on Arizona's model. What started as one Marine defending his right to display the American flag has become a nationwide movement to restore property rights and democratic governance to American communities. But perhaps the most important impact is the message this sends to HOA bullies everywhere. The days of unchecked power are over. Homeowners now have legal tools, legislative protection, and a proven playbook for fighting back against HOA overreach. As for Brenda Morrison, she completed her prison sentence in late 2027 and moved to a different state, reportedly living in an apartment complex with no HOA. Her real estate license was permanently revoked, and she faces ongoing civil liability for the damages her actions caused. The question isn't whether Jim Patterson won his fight. It's whether homeowners across America will use the tools he helped create to win their own battles against HOA tyranny. These 7 laws didn't just change Arizona, they changed the entire conversation about property rights, community governance, and the balance of power between homeowners and the associations that are supposed to serve them. So the next time you get a ridiculous HOA fine or face harassment from power-hungry board members, remember Jim Patterson's story. Remember that one person with documentation, determination, and the courage to fight back can change the law for millions of homeowners. The revolution has begun, and it's flying on a flagpole in a Phoenix suburb where a retired Marine decided that enough was enough. What will you do when your HOA oversteps their bounds? Will you roll over and pay the fine, or will you follow Jim's example and fight back with everything the law now gives you? The choice is yours, but thanks to these 7 new laws, you now have the tools to win.